What would you do if the person who promised to love you forever decided to end your marriage in front of an entire room full of powerful people? For Maya Brooks, that question became real on a cold autumn evening in Manhattan. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. Waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying silver trays filled with champagne. Politicians, investors, celebrities, and business leaders filled the room with laughter and conversation. It looked like a celebration. And in a way it was. Just not the celebration Maya thought she was attending. She stood beside her husband, Ethan Crawford, one of the most successful billionaires in New York. For years, people had admired them as the perfect couple. Ethan was ambitious, charismatic, and respected throughout the business world. Maya was elegant, intelligent, and impossible to ignore whenever she entered a room. Together, they seemed unstoppable. At least that was what everyone believed. Maya adjusted the sleeve of her black evening gown and glanced toward Ethan. Something felt different about him tonight. He had barely spoken to her all evening. Whenever she tried to catch his eye, he looked away. Whenever she smiled, his expression remained cold. The distance between them felt larger than the crowded ballroom itself. Still, Maya told herself she was imagining things. Marriage had challenges. Business created stress. Maybe he was simply tired. Across the room, guests suddenly began moving toward the stage. A spotlight illuminated the center of the ballroom. Conversations quieted. The event host stepped forward with a microphone and announced Ethan's name. The room erupted into applause. Ethan smiled. For the first time that evening, he walked onto the stage with the confidence that had made him famous. Maya watched proudly from her table. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of beginning a speech about business, Ethan cleared his throat and looked directly toward the audience. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he said. More applause followed. He paused. The smile slowly faded from his face. "And before this evening ends, I believe everyone deserves honesty." The room became quiet. Maya felt a knot form in her stomach. Ethan's gaze briefly found hers. There was no warmth in his eyes. No affection. No hesitation. Only certainty. "I've spent years building a future based on difficult decisions," he continued. "Sometimes success requires accepting when something no longer belongs in your life." Confused whispers spread throughout the ballroom. Maya sat perfectly still. She suddenly felt every pair of eyes turning toward her. Ethan took a slow breath. Then he said the words that changed everything. "Maya and I are getting divorced." Silence. Complete silence. The announcement hit the room like a shockwave. Several guests exchanged stunned looks. Others immediately reached for their phones. A few people appeared almost excited. Maya felt the air leave her lungs. For a moment, she wondered if she had heard him correctly. Divorce? Here? Now? In front of hundreds of people? The man she had stood beside for years continued speaking as though he were discussing a routine business transaction. "We've grown into different people, different priorities, different visions for the future." Every sentence felt colder than the last. Maya stared at him, searching for some sign of regret. There was none. Then she noticed something else. Near the front row sat Olivia Reed, Ethan's executive assistant. Young, beautiful, confident. And unlike everyone else in the room, Olivia did not look surprised. She looked prepared, as if she had known exactly what was about to happen. The realization settled heavily in Maya's chest. Suddenly, months of strange behavior began connecting together. The late-night meetings, the unanswered messages, the growing distance, the excuses, everything. The room remained frozen as Ethan finished his statement. When he stepped away from the microphone, scattered applause broke out among several guests. Not everyone applauded, but enough did. Enough to make the humiliation impossible to ignore. Maya slowly stood from her chair. The ballroom watched her. Some people pitied her. Others judged her. A few seemed eager to see her break down. But Maya refused to give them what they wanted. She lifted her chin, smoothed her dress, and calmly walked toward the exit. No tears, no argument, no scene. Behind her, the celebration continued. Ahead of her, an uncertain future waited. And none of the people inside that ballroom had any idea that the woman they believed had just lost everything was about to become the most important person in Ethan Crawford's future. What if the people celebrating your downfall had no idea they were watching the beginning of your greatest chapter? The morning after the divorce announcement, every major business blog in New York carried the same story. Ethan Crawford, Maya Brooks, divorce. Photos from the ballroom spread across social media within hours. Headlines described the separation as if it were a corporate merger coming to an end. Reporters analyzed every expression, every glance, every detail from the evening. Most of them reached the same conclusion. Maya had lost. The billionaire kept his empire. The wife walked away with memories. At least that was the story people wanted to believe. Maya sat quietly in a corner booth of a small coffee shop overlooking the Hudson River. For the first time in years, there were no assistants scheduling her day. No charity galas demanding her appearance. No board dinners requiring a perfect smile. Just silence. And strangely enough, the silence felt peaceful. Her phone vibrated constantly. Messages, calls, news alerts. Friends she had not heard from in months suddenly wanted to check on her. Some were sincere. Others were simply curious. She ignored most of them. Across the city, however, the atmosphere surrounding Ethan looked very different. 2 weeks after the announcement, he appeared at a major technology conference with Olivia Reed at his side. The cameras loved it. The headlines loved it. The public loved it. Many people called them New York's newest power couple. Olivia seemed to enjoy every moment. She stood beside Ethan during interviews. She attended private dinners with investors. She accompanied him to events Maya had once attended. And every photograph seemed carefully designed to send a message. The old chapter was over. The new chapter had begun. One evening, Ethan and Olivia arrived at an exclusive rooftop celebration hosted by several influential investors. As they entered, guests immediately surrounded them. Congratulations filled the air. You look happier than ever. You made the right decision. The future looks bright. Ethan smiled and accepted every compliment. Yet something unexpected happened during the evening. A prominent investor named Richard Lawson approached him. Richard had supported Ethan's projects for nearly a decade. Normally, he was warm and enthusiastic. Tonight, something felt different. Ethan, Richard said politely. We should talk next week. Of course, Ethan replied. About the Horizon deal? Richard hesitated. Possibly. Then he walked away. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. But it left Ethan strangely unsettled. Over the following weeks, similar moments began happening everywhere. Meetings became harder to schedule. Several investors delayed commitments. Partnership discussions suddenly moved slower than expected. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough to create discomfort. Meanwhile, Maya remained completely absent from public view. No interviews. No statements. No attempts to defend herself. The silence frustrated many reporters. People expected anger. People expected revenge. People expected public accusations. Instead, Maya disappeared. The mystery only increased public curiosity. One afternoon, Olivia sat inside Ethan's office reviewing market reports. A business magazine lay open across her desk. The cover featured Ethan's photograph. She smiled. This is exactly what we wanted, she said. Ethan glanced up from his laptop. What do you mean? The attention. The momentum. The fresh start. Ethan nodded. Yet for reasons he could not explain, the victory did not feel as satisfying as he had imagined. His eyes drifted toward the city skyline outside his office window. For years, Maya had stood beside him during every major milestone. Every success. Every setback. Every difficult decision. Now she was gone. And despite everything, the emptiness remained. A week later, Ethan attended a private investment dinner. Halfway through the evening, he overheard something unusual. 2 executives were discussing a rapidly growing investment group. The acquisition happened again. They're buying strategic positions everywhere. Who's behind it? No one knows. They're calling it Blackstone Crest Holdings. The name meant nothing to Ethan. At least not yet. But over the next month, he heard it again. And again. And again. Blackstone Crest Holdings. The mysterious investment company seemed to appear everywhere. Technology. Real estate. Infrastructure. Energy. Every major industry. Nobody knew who controlled it. Nobody knew where the money originated. Yet somehow, the company kept gaining influence. One evening, Ethan reviewed documents from an upcoming billion-dollar project. As he flipped through the paperwork, a familiar name suddenly appeared among the list of strategic stakeholders. Blackstone Crest Holdings. For the first time, the name was connected directly to his future. Ethan frowned. Something about the situation felt strange. Dangerously strange. And somewhere far away from the spotlight, Maya Brooks sat inside a quiet office overlooking Manhattan, calmly reviewing reports that carried the same project name. The project everyone believed belonged to Ethan Crawford. The project that would soon determine the future of his entire empire. And the project that Maya understood far better than he did. Have you ever ignored a warning simply because it came wrapped in silence? 3 months after the divorce, Ethan Crawford was more successful than ever. At least that was what the world believed. Every magazine seemed to feature his face. Every business conference wanted him as a speaker. Every interviewer asked about the next phase of his empire. And standing beside him through all of it was Olivia Reed, the woman many people now described as the future Mrs. Crawford. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But behind closed doors, small cracks were beginning to spread. The Horizon Project was supposed to be Ethan's greatest achievement. A massive development initiative connecting technology, infrastructure, and renewable energy across multiple states. If successful, it would elevate his company into an entirely new league. Investors called it revolutionary. Financial analysts predicted record profits. The numbers looked extraordinary. Yet somehow, every week brought a new complication. Permits that should have been approved quickly became delayed. Key suppliers unexpectedly withdrew. Several financial institutions requested additional reviews. Nothing catastrophic. Not yet, but enough to slow momentum. Enough to create concern. One Monday morning, Ethan entered a board meeting expecting routine updates. Instead, he found tension waiting for him. His executives looked uncomfortable. Several folders sat unopened on the conference table. What happened? Ethan asked. His chief financial officer exchanged nervous glances with the legal team. We've encountered another acquisition. Ethan frowned. From who? The answer came immediately. Blackstone Crest Holdings. The name appeared again, just as it had for weeks. Just as it had in meeting after meeting. Ethan leaned back in his chair. What exactly did they buy this time? The room fell quiet. Finally, someone answered. A controlling interest in one of our primary logistics partners. Silence followed. That was no longer a coincidence. That was strategy. Someone was positioning pieces on a board Ethan could not fully see. After the meeting ended, he returned to his office and stared at the Manhattan skyline. For the first time in years, uncertainty began creeping into his thoughts. He hated uncertainty, especially in business. Especially when someone else seemed to know more than he did. Meanwhile, Olivia remained confident. You worry too much, she said one evening while they attended a private dinner. It's one investment group. It's not just one investment group, Ethan replied. They keep appearing. Olivia laughed softly. Then buy them out. The answer sounded simple. But Ethan had already tried. Twice. Every attempt had failed. The ownership structure behind Blackstone Crest Holdings was hidden behind layers of legal entities, trusts, and private partnerships. No public records revealed the true owner. No interviews existed. No photographs. No public appearances. Nothing. The company operated like a ghost. And ghosts were difficult to fight. A week later, Ethan attended an exclusive gathering hosted by some of the most powerful investors in America. The event took place inside a luxury hotel overlooking Central Park. The guest list included billionaires, hedge fund managers, and corporate leaders. Normally, Ethan dominated rooms like this. Tonight felt different. During dinner, he noticed several conversations suddenly stopping whenever he approached. People exchanged looks. Subtle looks. The kind that suggested information was being shared behind the scenes. For the first time, Ethan felt excluded from a conversation involving his own future. Then he overheard something. 2 investors speaking quietly near the balcony. Whoever built Blackstone Crest is a genius. I heard they've been planning this for years. They're patient. They always seem 3 steps ahead. Ethan's jaw tightened. 3 steps ahead. The phrase stayed with him long after the event ended. The following morning, his assistant delivered a new stack of reports. One document immediately caught his attention. A market analysis. Several pages long. He flipped through it quickly, then stopped. Near the end of the report appeared a list of strategic stakeholders connected to Horizon. For the first time, he saw just how deeply Blackstone Crest Holdings had embedded itself throughout the project. Supplier networks, financing channels, technology contracts, property acquisitions. The company was everywhere. Everywhere. A cold feeling settled in his stomach. This was not a random investor making profitable moves. Someone had been building influence piece by piece, quietly, patiently, methodically, as if they had known exactly where Horizon would eventually lead. That evening, Ethan sat alone inside his penthouse office reviewing the documents again. And again, and again. One question kept repeating in his mind. Who was behind all of this? Across the city, several floors above a private investment office, Maya Brooks stood before a wall-sized digital display showing the same Horizon project. Dozens of analysts waited for her instructions. She reviewed the latest acquisition reports calmly. Then she gave a small nod. Proceed with phase 3. The room immediately came alive with activity. Documents moved. Calls began. Strategies shifted. And while Ethan Crawford desperately searched for the invisible hand influencing his future, he remained completely unaware that the woman he once discarded had already become the most powerful person connected to the project that would determine the fate of his empire. What if the biggest risk of your life was not the deal itself, but the person quietly controlling everything around it? The Horizon project was entering its most important phase. For months, Ethan Crawford had told investors that this would be the project that defined his legacy. Billions of dollars were already committed. Media outlets described it as one of the most ambitious private developments in the country. The pressure was enormous. But Ethan welcomed pressure. Pressure had always been where he performed best. Or at least that was what he believed. The next major financing round was scheduled to close in less than 3 weeks. Once finalized, Horizon would move from planning into full-scale execution. Thousands of jobs, hundreds of contractors, entire communities affected by its success or failure. Everything depended on securing the final approvals. At first, the meetings went well. Investors appeared enthusiastic. Bank representatives expressed confidence. Analysts continued issuing optimistic forecasts. Then something changed. A week before the financing vote, one of Ethan's largest institutional partners unexpectedly requested additional due diligence. The request surprised everyone. The project had already passed multiple reviews. Yet the partner refused to proceed without further examination. 2 days later, another investor followed. Then another. Then another. Suddenly, the financing process slowed to a crawl. Ethan spent nearly every waking hour on conference calls. What exactly are they worried about? He demanded during one meeting. Nobody had a clear answer. The concerns were vague. Risk exposure, long-term stability, market positioning. Nothing concrete. Nothing he could directly fight. That uncertainty frustrated him more than open opposition ever could. Meanwhile, rumors began spreading through financial circles. Rumors that certain investors were quietly reducing their exposure to Horizon. Rumors that major players were waiting for something or someone. Ethan hated rumors. Rumors created fear. Fear created hesitation. And hesitation destroyed deals. One evening, after another exhausting day, Ethan attended a private gathering at an exclusive members-only club. The room was filled with powerful executives. Many had known him for years. Many had supported his rise. Yet tonight felt different. Conversations became shorter when he approached. People smiled politely, but something felt distant, controlled, as though everyone knew information he did not. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt vulnerable. Across the room, he overheard a familiar name once again. Blackstone Crest Holdings. The conversation stopped the moment he turned toward it. That alone told him everything. The company had become more influential than anyone publicly admitted. The next morning brought even worse news. His legal team entered his office carrying a thick stack of documents. The expressions on their faces immediately caught his attention. What now? Ethan asked. His lead attorney placed the documents on the desk. We've identified additional acquisitions. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. How many? More than expected. He opened the reports. Property rights, transportation contracts, technology patents, supply agreements, one after another. The deeper he looked, the more impossible the situation appeared. Blackstone Crest was connected to nearly every critical component supporting Horizon. Not enough to control the project directly, but enough to influence it, enough to slow it, enough to pressure it, enough to break it if circumstances aligned. For the first time, Ethan considered a possibility he had been refusing to acknowledge. This was not business. This was personal. Someone was targeting Horizon intentionally. Someone was building leverage. Someone was waiting. The realization sent a chill through him. That evening, Olivia tried reassuring him. You've beaten competitors before. This isn't a competitor, Ethan replied quietly. Then who is it? The question lingered in the room. Because for the first time, he did not know the answer. Across the city, Maya Brooks sat inside the executive conference room of Blackstone Crest Holdings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the skyline. A dozen senior advisors waited for her decision. On the screen before her appeared a detailed timeline of Horizon's financing schedule. Every milestone, every weakness, every vulnerability. One analyst spoke first. The financing round is becoming unstable. Another added, several investors are preparing contingency plans. Maya listened carefully, calmly, patiently, the same way she had listened during years of being underestimated. Finally, she stood. The room became silent. Phase 4 begins today. No celebration followed. No applause. Only action. Her team immediately moved to execute the next stage. Calls were placed. Contracts activated. Meetings scheduled. The machine continued moving forward. Precisely as planned. As Maya watched the city lights illuminate the evening skyline, she remembered the ballroom where Ethan had ended their marriage. The whispers. The judgment. The humiliation. Everyone had assumed she was walking away with nothing. No one had realized she was walking towards something far greater. And while Ethan Crawford fought desperately to save the deal he believed would secure his future, Maya already held the one advantage money alone could never buy. She knew exactly where the game was going, because she had designed the board long before he realized he was playing. What if the person you were trying hardest to find was already standing in the center of your future? The Horizon project was no longer growing. It was stalling, not collapsing, not yet. But the momentum that had once made investors excited was beginning to disappear. Every day brought new complications. Every week brought new delays. And every delay cost money. Lots of money. Ethan Crawford spent most of his time inside conference rooms, trying to reassure investors that everything remained under control. The problem was that he was no longer sure that was true. For the first time in years, he found himself reacting instead of leading. The difference bothered him. One morning, his executive team gathered for an emergency meeting. The atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Nobody smiled. Nobody made small talk. The latest financial projections appeared on a massive screen at the front of the room. The numbers were ugly. Expected costs had increased. Projected timelines had expanded. Profit forecasts were shrinking. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Ethan stared at the screen. Then he asked the question everyone was thinking. How much of this is connected to Blackstone Crest? The room fell silent. Finally, the chief strategy officer answered. More than we originally believed. Ethan's expression hardened. Be specific. The executive swallowed. They now have influence across nearly 40% of the project's critical support infrastructure. Nobody spoke. 40%. The number felt impossible. Months ago, Blackstone Crest had been little more than a name appearing occasionally in reports. Now it was becoming a shadow stretching across Horizon itself. And somehow nobody had seen it happening. Later that afternoon, Ethan requested a private investigation. Not into Horizon, into Blackstone Crest Holdings. He hired one of the most respected corporate intelligence firms in the country. If anyone could uncover the truth, it would be them. The instructions were simple. Find the owner. Find the leadership team. Find whoever was controlling the company, no matter how much it cost. 3 days later, the investigators delivered their preliminary findings. Or rather, their lack of findings. The report contained almost nothing. No interviews. No public appearances. No executive profiles. No identifiable founder. Layer after layer of legal protections concealed the ownership structure. The company seemed almost invisible. The lead investigator looked frustrated. I've never seen anything built like this. Ethan stared at the report. What are you telling me? The investigator hesitated. I'm telling you that whoever created Blackstone Crest wanted to remain hidden. The answer haunted him. Because intentional secrecy required intentional planning. And intentional planning required purpose. Someone had not stumbled into power. Someone had built it. Carefully. Patiently. For years. Meanwhile, whispers continued spreading through financial circles. Stories about a mysterious strategist. A brilliant investor. A decision-maker whose judgment was becoming legendary among elite institutions. Nobody seemed willing to provide a name. Yet somehow everyone appeared to know exactly who they were talking about. One evening, Ethan attended another private investment gathering. The room buzzed with conversation. Champagne glasses clinked. Executives exchanged business updates. Yet one particular conversation caught his attention. An older investor spoke quietly to a group nearby. "The interesting thing isn't the money." "What do you mean?" someone asked. "The interesting thing is the discipline." Several people nodded. The investor continued. "Most people with power want attention. This person doesn't. They stay invisible. They let everyone underestimate them." Ethan felt an uncomfortable chill. The words sounded strangely familiar, almost personal. Across the city, Maya Brooks sat inside a private boardroom reviewing another series of acquisition reports. The room overlooked the skyline she once admired from Ethan's penthouse. Now she barely noticed it. Her attention remained fixed on the screen before her. One advisor entered carrying updated financial projections. "The pressure is working." Maya reviewed the data. Investors were becoming cautious. Financing partners were becoming nervous. The Horizon project was becoming vulnerable. Exactly as expected. Yet there was no satisfaction on her face. No celebration. No revenge-filled smile. Only focus. Only purpose. One of her senior advisors finally asked the question everyone had been wondering. "When do we reveal ourselves?" The room became quiet. Maya looked toward the city lights outside. For a moment, she remembered the night Ethan ended their marriage. The applause. The whispers. The certainty that she had lost everything. Then she looked back at the reports. "Not yet." The advisor nodded. Maya closed the file. Because the truth was that Ethan Crawford still believed he was fighting a company. He still believed Blackstone Crest Holdings was the mystery. He still believed the invisible hand guiding Horizon remained hidden. But the reality was far more dangerous. The company was never the secret. The secret was the woman behind it. And while Ethan continued searching for a stranger powerful enough to influence his future, he remained completely blind to the fact that the answer had already shared his last name once before. What would happen if the truth was sitting right in front of you, yet your pride made it impossible to see? The Horizon project was approaching a breaking point. Not because the idea was bad. Not because the market had changed. Not because investors had suddenly lost confidence. The problem was uncertainty. And uncertainty was spreading faster than Ethan Crawford could control. Every day brought another difficult conversation. Another investor asking questions. Another partner requesting assurances. Another executive reporting delays. The pressure was becoming relentless. For the first time in his career, Ethan felt trapped inside a situation he could not predict. That realization terrified him. One morning, his board demanded an emergency review. The conference room was packed. Directors, advisors, senior executives, all waiting for answers. The latest reports projected significant financial exposure if Horizon continued slowing at its current pace. Nobody liked what they saw. Neither did Ethan. A board member finally spoke. "How much longer can we sustain this?" No one answered immediately. The silence itself became an answer. Another director leaned forward. "Have we identified who's behind Blackstone Crest?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not yet." The room exchanged uncomfortable looks. That answer had become increasingly unacceptable. Months earlier, uncertainty had been an inconvenience. Now it was becoming a threat. After the meeting, Ethan returned to his office and stared at the city below. The skyline once represented certainty, control, power. Today it felt different. For the first time, he questioned whether he was still the most influential person shaping his own future. Later that afternoon, a new report arrived from the investigators. This one contained something unusual. Not a name, not a face, not a direct connection, just a pattern, a timeline. Ethan reviewed every page carefully. Acquisition dates, investment decisions, corporate expansions, strategic purchases. One detail immediately stood out. Blackstone Crest's earliest major growth period had begun shortly after his marriage to Maya. He frowned. Coincidence? Probably. Yet the timeline continued bothering him. The further he read, the more uncomfortable he became. The company had expanded quietly, methodically, year after year, always avoiding attention, always staying hidden, always moving strategically. The discipline reminded him of someone he used to know very well, someone patient, someone thoughtful, someone who never needed recognition. For a brief moment, Maya entered his thoughts. Then he immediately dismissed it. Impossible. Completely impossible. The woman he had divorced couldn't possibly be connected to a financial empire capable of influencing Horizon. The idea felt ridiculous, and yet he could not stop thinking about it. That evening, Ethan found himself looking through old photographs. Pictures from charity events, business dinners, private vacations, family celebrations. Images from a life that now felt strangely distant. In nearly every photograph, Maya looked exactly the same. Calm, observant, quiet. While everyone else competed for attention, she seemed perfectly comfortable standing outside the spotlight. At the time, Ethan had interpreted that as simplicity. Now he wondered if he had misunderstood her completely. Across the city, Maya sat inside Blackstone Crest's executive headquarters. The atmosphere remained calm, professional, disciplined. Everything functioned with remarkable precision. A senior advisor entered carrying fresh reports. The financing pressure is accelerating. Maya reviewed the numbers. Several major investors were preparing contingency plans. Others were reducing exposure. Some were waiting for clarification before making additional commitments. Exactly as expected. How close are we? The advisor asked. Maya studied the projections. Then she answered quietly. Closer than they realize. The advisor nodded. Everyone in the room understood what that meant. Years of planning were approaching their most important stage. Years of patience. Years of discipline. Years of remaining invisible. Soon, remaining invisible would no longer be possible. Later that night, Maya stood alone near the window overlooking Manhattan. The city lights stretched endlessly into the distance. Somewhere among those lights, Ethan was still searching for answers. Still chasing a ghost. Still looking everywhere except the one place he should have been looking all along. She felt no anger. No desire for revenge. Those emotions had disappeared long ago. What remained was clarity. The same clarity that had carried her through humiliation, through betrayal, through being underestimated. Back in his penthouse office, Ethan continued reviewing the investigation files. One sentence near the end of the report caught his attention. The lead investigator had written, "The individual behind Blackstone Crest demonstrates extraordinary patience and long-term strategic thinking. This appears less like an investment operation and more like a carefully executed life plan." Ethan read the sentence twice. Then a third time. A strange feeling settled over him. Because for the first time, the mystery no longer felt distant. It felt personal. Very personal. And although he still lacked proof, the pieces were beginning to move into place. The collapse of Horizon was no longer his greatest concern. His greatest concern was the growing possibility that the person controlling his future might be someone he had already made the biggest mistake of his life losing. What if the answer you spent months chasing suddenly appeared in a place you never expected? The collapse of certainty happened quietly. Not with a headline. Not with a scandal. Not with a dramatic announcement. It happened through conversations. Through whispers. Through growing doubt. The kind of doubt that spreads through boardrooms faster than any crisis. By now, everyone connected to the Horizon project could feel it. Something was changing, and nobody understood what. Investors were becoming cautious. Partners were becoming selective. Lenders were demanding additional protections. The confidence that once surrounded Ethan Crawford was beginning to fade. Not because people suddenly disliked him. Because they no longer felt sure he was in control. That distinction mattered. A great deal. One afternoon, Ethan attended a private gathering hosted by several institutional investors. The room was filled with some of the most influential financial figures in the country. People whose approval could move billions of dollars. Normally, Ethan thrived in these environments. Today felt different. The conversation stopped when he approached. The smile seemed forced. The energy felt strange. Almost guarded. Then something unexpected happened. Across the room, several investors suddenly stood up. Not because of Ethan. Because someone else had entered. Ethan turned instinctively. The woman who walked into the room was dressed elegantly, but simply. No entourage. No public announcement. No attempt to attract attention. Yet the reaction was immediate. People moved toward her. Executives greeted her. Investors asked for her opinion. Several industry leaders appeared eager to speak with her. Ethan frowned. He had never seen her before. Or at least he thought he hadn't. One investor noticed his confusion. "You don't know her?" Ethan shook his head. The man looked genuinely surprised. "Interesting. What does that mean?" Ethan asked. The investor smiled. "It means you're one of the few." Before Ethan could ask another question, The conversation shifted elsewhere. But the moment stayed with him. Who was she? And why did everyone seem to know her? Later that evening, Ethan requested information about the event attendees. The response arrived the following morning. Most names meant nothing. One did. A woman connected to multiple investment groups. A woman who sat on several advisory boards. A woman whose reputation for strategic decision-making had become legendary. The name wasn't Maya, but something about the profile felt strangely familiar. The pattern, the discretion, the influence without publicity. The more he read, the more questions he had. Meanwhile, inside Blackstone Crest headquarters, Maya reviewed a new series of reports. The room was calm. As always. No panic. No excitement. Just preparation. A senior analyst placed a folder on the table. The latest investor sentiment reports. Maya opened it. The numbers confirmed what she already suspected. Confidence around Horizon was weakening rapidly. Not because anyone had launched an attack. Because uncertainty had reached critical levels. Investors feared what they could not understand. And Blackstone Crest remained the biggest mystery in the room. One advisor smiled. They're getting closer. Maya looked up. To what? To discovering the truth. The room became quiet. Maya considered the statement carefully. Then she shook her head. No. The advisor looked confused. Maya closed the report. They're getting closer to asking the right questions. There was a difference. A very important difference. Because asking the right questions did not guarantee finding the right answers. Across town, Ethan received another message from his investigators. This time, the report contained something extraordinary. A partial ownership trail. Not enough to identify the ultimate owner, but enough to reveal a pattern. Several entities connected to Blackstone Crest shared historical ties to charitable foundations, educational initiatives, community investment programs, projects focused on long-term development rather than short-term profit. Ethan stared at the pages. He recognized those priorities. He had seen them before. Years ago, during his marriage, Maya had supported those exact causes. He remembered the conversations, the proposals, the ideas he had often dismissed as secondary to business. For the first time, he stopped reading. A strange feeling settled into his chest. Not certainty, not proof, just possibility. A possibility that refused to disappear. That night, Ethan sat alone inside his penthouse. The city stretched endlessly beneath him. For months he had searched for a powerful stranger, a hidden competitor, an invisible architect, someone operating from the shadows. But now another possibility was beginning to emerge. A possibility that felt almost impossible to accept. What if the person behind Blackstone Crest wasn't a stranger at all? What if the most powerful force influencing his future was someone he once believed needed him? Miles away, Maya stood inside a quiet executive conference room. Behind her, a massive screen displayed acquisition reports, financial forecasts, and ownership structures. Years of work. Years of planning. Years of patience. One advisor entered. The final preparations are complete. Maya nodded. No celebration followed. No dramatic reaction. Only calm acceptance. Because the next phase would change everything. The hidden name behind Blackstone Crest was about to become impossible to hide. And when the truth finally surfaced, Ethan Crawford would discover that the person he spent months trying to identify was the same woman he had once convinced himself was powerless. What if the person you underestimated for years turned out to be the most powerful person in the room all along? The truth arrived slowly, then all at once. For months, Ethan Crawford had chased a mystery, a hidden investor, a silent strategist, a force powerful enough to influence entire industries without ever appearing in public. Now the walls surrounding that mystery were beginning to collapse. The first confirmation came from a private investment report. One of Ethan's analysts entered his office carrying a folder marked confidential. His expression said everything. This is the closest we've ever gotten. Ethan opened the report. Several ownership structures had finally been connected. Charitable foundations, private trusts, investment entities, educational grants, community development programs. At first, the information seemed unrelated. Then he saw the pattern. Every organization had one common connection. A name. Not as an owner, not as a director, not as an executive, as an advisor. Maya Brooks. Ethan froze. The room suddenly felt smaller. For several seconds, nobody spoke. His analyst finally broke the silence. We verified it 3 times. Ethan stared at the page, then at the name again, then again, as if repetition might somehow change the result. It didn't. For years, Maya's name had quietly appeared beside organizations that eventually became enormously successful, projects that expanded, investments that multiplied, communities that flourished, businesses that survived economic downturns. The evidence stretched back years, even before their marriage. And that realization hit harder than anything else. Before their marriage, Maya had already been building something important, something significant, something he had never noticed, or perhaps never bothered to see. Meanwhile, across the financial world, rumors were spreading rapidly. The mystery surrounding Blackstone Crest was disappearing. Investors who once speculated privately now spoke openly. Boardrooms buzzed with conversations. Executives exchanged information. Financial publications began asking questions. One headline appeared repeatedly. Who was the woman behind Blackstone Crest? For the first time, Maya's name was no longer hidden. And the reaction shocked everyone. Because there was no scandal, no deception, no secret inheritance, no sudden fortune, only years of disciplined decisions, years of intelligent planning, years of patient execution. The more people learned about her history, the more respect she earned. They discovered she had spent years studying markets most investors ignored. They learned she had quietly built relationships across industries. They discovered she had reinvested profits while others chased publicity. Again and again, the same conclusion appeared. Maya's success was not luck. It was strategy. Back at Horizon headquarters, Ethan continued reading. Every page seemed to rewrite his memories. Conversations he barely remembered now felt different. Ideas he once dismissed suddenly looked visionary. Warnings he ignored now appeared painfully accurate. Moments he thought were insignificant became impossible to forget. For years, he believed Maya lived in his world. The truth was far more complicated. She had been building her own, and it was larger than he ever imagined. Late that evening, Ethan found himself looking through old photographs. Vacations, charity events, business dinners, anniversaries, thousands of moments frozen in time. And for the first time, he realized something disturbing. He had spent years looking at Maya, but he had never truly seen her. Not her intelligence, not her ambition, not her vision, not her strength. Only the version that fit comfortably inside his assumptions. That realization hurt more than the financial damage. Because money could be recovered, opportunities could be rebuilt. But understanding what he had lost was different. Much different. Across the city, Maya attended a private gathering of investors and industry leaders. The atmosphere felt completely different from the one Ethan remembered. There were no whispers, no doubts, no questions about whether she belonged. Only respect. The room stood when she entered. Not because she demanded it, because she had earned it. One investor smiled. Congratulations. Maya nodded politely. For what? The world finally knows who you are. A quiet smile crossed her face. Then she answered softly. No. The investor looked confused. Maya glanced around the room. The world is only beginning to learn. Hours later, another report landed on Ethan's desk. This one contained the final confirmation. Ownership structures, control mechanisms, investment authority, strategic oversight. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Blackstone Crest, the company controlling much of Horizon's future. The organization that had become the most powerful force in his professional life. The empire he spent months trying to identify belonged to Maya. Ethan lowered the report slowly. The answer he had chased was finally in front of him. And with it came a devastating realization. The woman he once believed depended on him had quietly built an empire powerful enough to shape his future. But the hardest truth had nothing to do with money, nothing to do with influence, nothing to do with power. The hardest truth was realizing that while Maya had spent years becoming extraordinary, he had spent those same years underestimating her. And now the entire world knew her value. Just as Ethan Crawford was beginning to understand what he had lost. What if the door you desperately wanted to walk through again had already been closed forever? The revelation changed everything. Within days, the financial world knew the truth. Maya Brooks was the force behind Blackstone Crest, the mysterious strategist, the invisible architect, the woman whose decisions had quietly reshaped entire industries. Interviews were requested. Partnerships were proposed. Investors competed for meetings. Business publications celebrated her story. And everywhere the same question appeared. How had nobody seen it before? For Ethan Crawford, the answer was painfully simple. He hadn't looked. Not really. For years, he believed he understood Maya. Now he realized he had understood only the version he wanted to see. The version that made him feel comfortable. The version that never challenged his assumptions. The truth was far more impressive. And far more painful. One morning, Ethan found himself standing outside Blackstone Crest headquarters. The building was elegant, modern, confident, like the woman who built it. For several moments, he simply stared at the entrance. Months earlier, he would have walked through those doors with certainty. Now he felt something unfamiliar. Nervousness. Not because of business. Because of Maya. Eventually, he requested a meeting. To his surprise, the answer came quickly. Approved. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. That single word occupied his thoughts for the next 24 hours. Approved. Not welcomed. Not invited. Approved. The distinction mattered. The next day, Ethan entered the executive conference room. The same room where some of the most powerful investors in the country regularly gathered. But today, there was only one person he cared about seeing. Maya sat at the far end of the table. Calm. Composed. Confident. She looked exactly like herself. And yet somehow completely different. Perhaps because he was finally seeing her clearly. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ethan broke the silence. You built all of this. Maya smiled gently. Not all at once. The answer carried no arrogance. No anger. No need to prove anything. That made it harder. Much harder. Ethan looked around the room. The company. The influence. The success. Everything reflected years of effort. Years he had never truly noticed. I didn't know, he said quietly. Maya nodded. I know. The simplicity of her response struck him harder than any accusation could have. Because it was true. He hadn't known. And more importantly, he hadn't tried to know. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. They spoke about business. About growth. About opportunities. About the years that had passed. But beneath every topic lived a deeper truth. Regret. Not hers. His. Finally, Ethan asked the question he had carried into the room. Is there any chance we can start over? The room became completely still. Maya looked at him carefully. Not with anger. Not with bitterness. Not with resentment. Simply with honesty. The kind of honesty that cannot be negotiated. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she answered. No. The word was soft. But absolute. Ethan lowered his eyes. Not because he was surprised. Because part of him had already known. Maya continued gently. You were part of an important chapter of my life. Ethan listened silently. But chapters are not the same as futures. The words settled between them. Neither cruel nor comforting. Simply true. Outside the building, the city continued moving. Cars passed. Meetings happened. Deals were signed. Life continued. Inside the room, however, something was ending. Not a business relationship. Not a partnership. A possibility. The possibility of returning to what once existed. And both of them understood it. When the meeting finally ended, Ethan stood. So this is goodbye. Maya smiled softly. No. He looked confused. She stood as well. This is acceptance. For the first time in months, Ethan understood exactly what she meant. Goodbye implied something unfinished. Something lost unexpectedly. Acceptance meant recognizing reality. And reality was simple. Maya had moved forward. Years ago, long before he realized it. As Ethan left the building, he glanced back one final time. Not at Blackstone Crest. At the woman standing inside it. The woman he once underestimated. The woman he once believed needed him. The woman who had quietly become extraordinary. And in that moment, he finally understood the greatest lesson of his life. His biggest loss had never been horizon. It had never been influence. It had never been money. His biggest loss was the woman whose value he recognized only after the world had already learned to appreciate it. And while success had made Maya powerful, it was wisdom that made her truly remarkable. Because she had never built her future to prove anyone wrong. She had built it because she believed in herself even when nobody else did. Including the man who once promised to stand beside her forever. And that door, once closed, never needed to open again.